Now we will continue our black men and women in the struggle for freedom. Black men and women, black church men and women in the struggle for freedom. Now, keep in mind, this is Black History Month, so I'm emphasizing blackness. At the same time, we have an outreach to all of the members of the family, of the human family. Now, I've covered so far the introduction, in which I laid the groundwork saying that there were 5 periods of church history, and also which I gave a scriptural basis for my prioritization of Afrocentrism, that Jesus said first in his ministry, first go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But then at the end of his ministry, he said go to all the world. I believe Jesus was teaching us we start with our own. We start with our own, and we go from there. I quoted Rabbi Hillel, who said, if I am not for myself, who am I? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So it is all right to be for yourself, but never only for yourself. And then we start looking at a period of black church history from the time that we arrived until 1864. We talked about the ways in which people of African ancestry struggled against the oppressive regimes and the plantation system. They developed the Underground Railroad. They fought through literature. They fought through insurrection. Yes, there were violent insurrections. And in fact, I concluded last week by quoting from a great book written by Dr. Gaylord Wilmore, Black Religion and Black Radicalism. He wrote thus from David Walker, whose famous writings called Walker's Appeal, urged slaves to take up arms. To Nat Turner, Black Religion in the United States, strongly fortified by the Old Testament apocalypse, provided the slaves with the inner resources to resist oppression with violence if necessary. The white people of the South, who observed the slave preachers at close range and knew of the fierce amalgam of the African spirituality and radical Christianity, which infused their sometimes open but more often secret subversion of the slave system, threw up the ramparts of repressive legislation and the lynch laws against them. I know we have been told that America is the place of the freedom of religion. Yeah, but it was not always so. Not as it related to people of African ancestry, because the slave masters knew that religion for the slaves of that time was religion of liberation. They had revolution on their mind. They had freedom on their mind. Perhaps it is best said in the old spiritual, oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. However, the revolutionaries and activists sing it differently today. They sing, before I be a slave, I'll bury the slave master in his grave and send him off to hell so we can be free. All right, now what we want to look at is the time of relief, from 1865 to 1880. I should go back for a minute and just to emphasize that when people employ violence to subject people, enslave people, you can anticipate people are going to use the same methods to be free. But now, let's look at the time of relief. Consider now the years from 1865 to 1880. This is the period in which the chief characteristics of the church was relief. With the end of the Civil War, expectations were high. Surely, black people's slave days were over. Black people had agitated for years on the evils of slavery, creating over 50 anti-slavery societies. The country, it would seem, had come to accept that position. Black people had fought on behalf of the Union. In fact, it was said that there would have been no Union, for without the black soldier, the South would have won the war. Abraham Lincoln said as much. Not only that, but some people remembered that blacks had also fought in the Revolutionary War 90 years before. It was Crispus Attucks whose blood was first spilled. Had the black soldier not been at the barricades during those revolutionary days in the early history of this country, had they not been at Bunker Hill, Valley Forge, and Concord, there would have been no nation. George Washington said as much. And some remembered that blacks had fought in the War of 1812 too. So there was great anticipation. The days of bondage were over. Freedom and justice were begun. Long live the Union. Political gains enhanced the hope still more. The legislatures of the South had ample black representation. From the state, and mark it well, from the state of Mississippi came 2 black U.S. senators, Hiram K. Revels and Blanche K. Bruce. In 1866, Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill over the veto of President Johnson, not Lyndon Johnson now. In 1875, most civil rights laws were enacted, and there were the constitutional safeguards. The 13th Amendment freed the slave, the 14th made him a citizen, and the 15th Amendment gave him the right to vote. These were amendments to the Constitution. So the black church turned its attention away from rebellion toward relief. Let me say that again. This is a very important point in the black church history. Remember now, the earlier years, the black church priority was freedom. Whether the church was in North or whether it was in South, it was freedom that the black church had on its mind. Now, however, apparently, the slave days are over. So the black church now turned its attention away from rebellion toward relief. The freed man needed special help to adjust to the new state of things, and the gains made before the Civil War needed to be consolidated. With the generous assistance of white churches, schools were started, burial societies grew into insurance companies. I should point it out, too, that during this period, the black church demonstrated its philanthropic drive in that chicken dinners and chitlins and hog maws were sold, and fish fries, pennies were raised in order to raise money to educate the children. The slaves, enslaved persons, knew that at least one of the roads, maybe the major road toward the fulfillment of our dreams, would be through education. Oh, would to God we could get that message through to our young people today. What our forebears went through to get an education. They raised money. They even put their lives on the line in order that their children would be able to get an education. Yes, as I mentioned, there was assistance from white churches also. And burial societies. You know, our church, many years later, to the eternal credit of my dad, Bishop Daughtry, the founder of our church, he started a burial society back in the 30s. He witnessed that insurance companies were still ripping people off. And he got the church to engage in a burial society in which they would put up money, and when the time for burial would come, they were buried, and whatever money was there that exceeded the burial expense was returned to the members. It was not so with the insurance companies. Oh, they fought him, and the insurance company went to court, and the court ruled in favor of the insurance companies. And not only that, but there were black morticians who struck an alliance with the insurance companies. And so my dad was hauled into court, and he was forbidden to engage anymore in the burial society. But history has vindicated him insofar as some years ago it was ruled that these insurance companies indeed were taking advantage of the people. And there was a notification sent out that anybody, and they listed the names, anybody who had relatives or knew these people should contact, gave a place to contact so that you could be remunerated. Yes, thank God for my dad and for this great church who saw as a part of its ministry was to take care of its members, also economically. My dad engaged in various economic ventures. He had one of the first stores here in Brooklyn, New York. Now, as John Hope Franklin wrote in his book, From Slavery to Freedom, another agency that offered both spiritual and material relief during Reconstruction was the Negro Church. The end of war led to the expansion of the independent churches among Negroes. There were no longer Southern laws to silence Negro preachers and to prescribe their separate organizations. Negroes began to withdraw from white churches once they had secured their freedom, and consequently the Negro church grew rapidly after the war, end quote. Oh, Lord, they might have withdrawn from white churches back in slavery days, immediately following slavery days, but it is not true. Their children seem to delight in having membership in white churches. Now, let me hasten to say this. When I think of white churches and white leaders in particular, I categorize them in three ways. Number one, they are the conservatives. That is the fundamentalists, the Bible-believing, heaven-going, sanctify your soul white preachers who don't involve themselves in anything except trying to save Africa while their black neighbors are in the worst condition ever. They don't get involved in anything. There is a church not far from our church. All these Negroes crowd into this church. I've been pastoring 52 years. I've never seen the leadership of that church engaged in anything at all related to people, bettering people's social, political, economic condition. Yet when these members are uptight, when they're being abused, guess what? They go to the black preachers. They come here. So that's one kind of white preacher. There's another kind that is the liberal white preacher. Well, he's all right. He's for our spiritual well-being. He's for our liberation, social justice, and all that. But he wants to sustain leadership. He wants to maintain the leadership. And then there is the third kind that understands that in the struggle against oppression, those who are oppressed should have the leadership. Those who are oppressed should be promoted as the leaders. And they understand this. And when Black Power days were upon us, these were the preachers, the white leaders, and the rabbis who stayed in the program, realizing that he that would be free must first strike the first blow. So when I talk of white churches and leaving white churches or being in white churches, I want to underscore, I'm not talking about the doctrinal statement of any church. I'm not critical of anybody's doctrinal statement. And it's also, in addition, I don't want the Muslims to escape either. I don't want these Arabs to escape either. Dr. John Henry Clark used to teach us that, generally speaking, Dr. Clark would say, Arabs have used Islam for their political advance, and so they too have participated in the raping and ravishing of Africa, but they usually get a bye because their complexion looked like us. I remember arguing with a friend of mine during the days of Darfur, when Darfur was in the limelight, and it is still being exploited. That Bashir, Omar Bashir, the president of Sudan, how he had bombed the people. And this brother would say to me, but look at his complexion. And I would say, what has his complexion got to do with anything? The man is destroying us. In addition to that, some of these Arab nations are still engaged in slavery. So I don't pass up anybody. In my criticism of some of my Muslim brothers, that they never criticize Muslim leaders. Muslim leaders in different parts of the world are killing Christians, killing people. They never say a word here. We took on the white leaders of our particular religion. I challenge Muslims to take on these Arab leaders who are exploiting us, who are still enslaving us, and to step forward and be courageous and tell the world that they have to stop doing what they're doing. All right, we're just about at the end now. Don't forget, wherever you're listening, whatever state you're in, you can accept the Lord Jesus Christ wherever you are and whatever your conditions are, and God will forgive you for whatever your sins. And don't forget that Timbuktu has opened again. This has been Pastor Daughtry. I hope to see you today somewhere along the way.